It's a great privilege to introduce Carl, a longtime friend and supporter of this work, along with Drew. The two of them are truly embodying this cosmology and race area. And while Carl is known to pretty much everyone in the Bay Area, I'll just say a few things about him. He's an architect, an author, an urban, suburban, regional design strategist. He's the co-founder of the Breakthrough Community Project. So there's so much to say, but he worked at the Ford Foundation as the acting director of the Community and Resource Development Unit, responsible for the foundation's worldwide program in the field of environment and development and community development. One of the great moments in my life was meeting Carl out in Wisconsin at a conference where he got up and he said, well, yes, I've been doing this urban planning and so on, but my life was changed when I read The Dream of the Earth. And he said he was sitting in his, you can tell the fuller story, but he was saying this changed everything because he felt like we all do. It gives us a sense of where we belong and what we can do. And that moment created a dialogue, a sense of a new lineage, because Carl also recognized things were missing. And he went on to write a fantastic book, which I recommend fully. It's called The Earth, the City, and the Hidden Narrative of Race, which came out 2 years ago. So the reason we're standing here together is to celebrate that sense of cosmos and race, of equity and inequities, of inclusion, and what does it mean to create a truly flourishing Earth community that brings together, as Thomas just suggested, must happen, a sense of social justice and a sense of cosmology. And that's what we are doing together. And so in celebration of that, and in celebration of Carl's life work, I'm announcing here, so we can celebrate him, that next year we will give Carl the Thomas Berry Award. So this is your chance to speak and then be in dialogue with Drew.
Okay, well, I think Drew and I had a couple of phone calls, and we agreed that we were going to talk 10 minutes each, and then we'd have the rest of the 20 minutes after that to talk together. And we also agreed that I would talk first, and then he would introduce his ideas, but I came in at the tail end of his ideas, so hey, it's really wonderful to be here. And the things that I got out of Drew's presentation a minute ago, or a couple of minutes ago, is the soul of the modern world, and the soul of a new moment that we're living in. And the soul of the modern world is, it's a fantastic story that goes off in many directions. But one of the things that also happened with the birth of the modern world was the Atlantic slave trade. And the reason I mention this is because we have been living the last 400 years, 500 years since the birth of the modern world, with a legacy that has to do with all of the dimensions of understanding of the modern world that have emerged, including all of the contradictions and conflicts in the modern world that emerged at that moment. But as an African American living on the edge of the modern world, and with one foot in a world that is question mark what it is, one of the things that I discovered late in my life was how important it was to really tell a new story. And they were all living as part of a new story. So the thing that I learned as I began to think about this, I was born in 1939, and I had my 80th birthday about 2 weeks ago, is that the world that I grew up in had some peculiar understanding of the African American experience. had a very peculiar understanding, and I'll just mention four curious aspects of this. The first is that even though 12 million people were kidnapped from West Africa and brought to the world, brought to the New World in chains, the people who were developing a vision of the modern world had very little understanding of Africa. And this understanding, this lack of understanding of Africa it had a heritage of 200,000 years of existence before that moment, was sort of summed up with this idea of the dark continent. So one factor was that we have inherited a view of the modern world in which Africa is really a kind of shadow existence. And then we had the Atlantic slave trade, which transported the 12 million people to the New World to help the Europeans lay a foundation for helping to create the modern world. But the central fact of that particular moment was that because some people had a conscience, other people had no conscience, but there was a sort of an agreement between all of the people who were helping to shape the rest of the modern world, except those on whose backs were this period was really developed. At that particular moment, they were ashamed of that, so there was a kind of agreement between all of the people who participated in that, is that we just won't talk about the Atlantic slave trade. It just didn't exist. So we had 2,000 years of existence in African history, and then we had another 250 to 300 years in the Atlantic slave trade that we agreed not to talk about. And then after the Atlantic slave trade, we then had in North America and in South America and in the Caribbean, a number of islands in the Caribbean, we had a period of another 250 years, 300 years of slavery. And we reluctantly said, well, okay, we will admit that some people made a mistake. Some people made a mistake, but you know, the fact is that we really, it's too valuable for us to actually go back and correct that, because we have the modern world and we have to keep going. And at that particular time, the plantation economies were the things that really drove the creation of the modern world. So we admitted that there was slavery, but we understand that we had a huge civil war, 600,000 casualties in that, and so we made a mistake. But it's a good thing that it's over, and now we can go on with our business of creating the modern world. But it's a reluctant and sad thing that happened in the slave period. But now that it's over, we're free. And so there was, in addition to the Atlantic slave trade, which really was a huge, horrific experience, we now had 250 years worth of slavery on the land. No wonder we have such confusion about the land. And Wendell Berry wrote about this a lot. That the people in the South that had the plantations really, their communities were really divided in half. One was white and one was black, and the sense of connection to the land was actually severed at that point. And then we had another 100, 150 years of Jim Crow, which was a system of recreating the subordination of African Americans to white supremacy. And I want to say one thing as kind of central to my own discovery is, of course, that there's no such thing as white people. So there was a peculiar moment that happened back in 1660 with Bacon's Rebellion. Some of you may have heard about that. Bacon's Rebellion, the Africans and the European indentured servants joined together and rebelled against the colonies who dominated the North American community. And we have to say is that they had stolen land from Native Americans, and now we also had the subordination of African Americans, and then an overlay of a new set of experiences that even though the African indentured servants and the European indentured servants from many different places, many different traditions, which are very rich and vital, and we need to look back and see if we can understand them. But they decided at that moment that there was a new category, a new legal category. And it was the first time in legal jurisdiction that the concept of whiteness, can you really get this? The concept of whiteness, because they managed to put the rebellion, the overlords managed to put the rebellion down, and they started to define privileges to the white people and obligations of the black people. And that was when the definition of white people began. So that was in the 1660s. So I want to really maybe open our conversation or continue our conversation by pointing out that we had a legacy of really overlooking, undermining, destroying, and capturing the benefit of all the people, African people who had been part of our culture from the very beginning. And now we're kind of waking up to the fact that we have two bodies of thought, which are supposed to be one body of thought, which is our shared experience in the North American continent and in the New World and in basically the Earth community. So I think I could probably leave it there, and we'll have some time to talk about that, and then we'll pass it on to you guys to talk about it for the next couple of centuries.